For 47 years, Dr. Jerry Francisco carried a terrible secret about the day Elvis Presley passed away. The official autopsy report said one thing, but the truth was something different. Now, at 93 years, he is finally ready to reveal everything. What was Dr. Francisco hiding? Join us as we uncover the shocking confession that changes everything. The call that changed everything. The phone rang at 2 in the morning, shattering the silence of Dr. Jerry Francisco's quiet Memphis home. At 93 years old, he rarely received calls at all anymore, let alone in the dead of night. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the receiver, his heart already knowing that this moment would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to a young journalist who had spent months comparing autopsy reports and medical records from 1977. She had found inconsistencies, gaps that did not make sense, numbers that did not add up. After 47 years of carrying a secret that had aged him far beyond his years, Dr. Francisco felt something shift inside his chest. The weight he had been carrying since that terrible August day was finally demanding to be released. His mind drifted back to August 16, 1977. A day that started like any other until the phone call came at 2:30 in the afternoon. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had been rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital. By the time Francisco arrived, chaos had consumed the entire building. Reporters were already gathering outside, fans were beginning to crowd the streets, and inside the hospital the atmosphere felt electric with panic and disbelief. Security guards lined every hallway, and the normally calm medical staff moved with frantic urgency. When Francisco first saw Elvis lying on that examination table, his breath caught in his throat. The man before him looked nothing like the vibrant performer the world knew and loved. Elvis had been struggling in his final months, canceling shows and appearing confused during performances. His weight had fluctuated dramatically, and those closest to him had watched with growing concern as he became a shadow of his former self. The inner circle at Graceland had whispered their worries, but nobody seemed able to stop the downward spiral. Now, looking at the body before him, Francisco understood that something was terribly wrong with the picture everyone wanted to paint. The examination revealed truths that Francisco knew would shake the world. But before he could even complete his initial assessment, powerful figures began arriving at the hospital. Men in expensive suits, music industry executives, city officials, and representatives from the Presley estate filled the corridors. Their presence was not supportive but controlling. Their voices not concerned but commanding. They spoke in hushed tones about protecting legacies, preserving images, and maintaining the economic stability of Memphis itself. The pressure mounted with each passing hour, and Francisco felt the walls closing in around him. Then came the phone call that changed everything. That same night, as Francisco sat at his desk trying to process what he had discovered, his home phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and absolutely terrifying. The caller knew the names of Francisco's 2 young children, knew which schools they attended, and knew the route his wife took to work each morning. The message was crystal clear, without ever making a direct threat. Francisco could tell the truth and watch his family suffer, or he could sign a report that told a carefully crafted version of events. The choice was not really a choice at all. For 47 years, Dr. Francisco lived with that decision. He watched his children grow up, attended their weddings, met his grandchildren, and carried the burden of his life through every milestone. The secret poisoned parts of his life that should have been pure joy. But now, with his family grown and safe, with most of the people who had threatened him long dead, and with his own time on earth growing short, Francisco made a different choice. He told the journalist he would talk, that he would finally reveal what really happened on that August day in 1977. The truth was far darker than anyone had imagined, and it began with what Francisco actually found when he examined the king's body that afternoon. What Dr. Francisco discovered on that examination table would reveal a medical nightmare that the world was never meant to see. The substances in Elvis's system told a story of something far more sinister than simple addiction, and the evidence pointed to a systematic failure that went straight to the top. What really ended the life of the king? Dr. Francisco sat across from the journalist, his weathered hands folded on the table between them, and began to speak the truth he had buried for nearly 5 decades. The autopsy report he signed in 1977 listed cardiac arrhythmia as the cause of death, a heart condition that sounded natural and almost peaceful. But that official statement was only a fraction of the real story. A carefully constructed lie designed to protect powerful interests, while the actual evidence told a far more disturbing tale. When Francisco examined Elvis's body that August afternoon, what he found shocked him to his core. The toxicology results revealed 14 different substances coursing through the king's system, a pharmaceutical cocktail that would have been dangerous for anyone, let alone someone with Elvis's existing health conditions. The levels of codeine and morphine alone were staggering, and when combined with the other prescription medications present, they created a lethal mixture that his body simply could not survive. These were not street substances or illegal substances, but medications prescribed by licensed physicians, signed off on prescription pads and filled at legitimate pharmacies. The physical evidence painted an even grimmer picture. Elvis's body showed clear signs of long-term prescription substance misuse that had ravaged his organs over many years. His liver displayed damage consistent with processing massive amounts of medication, his kidneys showed strain from filtering toxins, and his digestive system bore the marks of chronic pharmaceutical dependence. Francisco found bruising and injection marks that indicated regular use of intravenous medications, something that should have raised immediate red flags with any responsible physician. The state of Elvis's body told the story of a man who had been slowly dying for years while everyone around him looked the other way. The most damning discovery involved Dr. George Nicopolis, known to everyone as Dr. Nick, who had served as Elvis's personal physician. Francisco's investigation revealed that in just the 8 months before Elvis's death, Dr. Nick had prescribed over 10,000 pills to his famous patient. The sheer volume was staggering and clearly indicated a pattern of gross medical negligence at best, or something far more sinister at worst. These prescriptions included powerful painkillers, sedatives, and stimulants that should never have been combined. Yet they were being given to Elvis in quantities that defied all medical ethics and safety protocols. The evidence suggested that Elvis had taken what would become his final dose just hours before his death on that August afternoon. The concentration of substances in his system indicated recent ingestion, and the combination was simply too much for his already compromised body to handle. Francisco believed that Elvis likely felt unwell, took medication to help himself feel better, not realizing that the mixture would prove fatal. The tragedy was that this outcome had been predictable and entirely preventable if anyone in Elvis's circle had prioritized his health over their own interests. The man behind the threat. The phone call came just 6 hours after Elvis had been pronounced dead, catching Dr. Francisco at home as he tried to process the overwhelming events of that afternoon. What made the call so terrifying was not anger or aggression, but the calm, almost polite tone of the voice on the other end. The man spoke with the measured confidence of someone who held all the power, someone who knew exactly how much leverage he possessed over Francisco's entire world. The caller knew things that made Francisco's blood run cold, intimate details about his family that no stranger should ever possess. The voice described Francisco's children with disturbing accuracy, mentioning their names, ages, and which elementary school they attended in their quiet Memphis neighborhood. He knew what time Francisco's wife left for work each morning, knew the route she took, knew where she stopped for coffee on Wednesday mornings. The caller even mentioned their home address and described the color of their front door and the placement of their mailbox. This was not someone making empty threats or bluffing to get what they wanted. This person had been watching Francisco's family, studying their routines, and gathering information long before Elvis had even passed away. The voice claimed to represent interests that stretched far beyond Memphis, hinting at connections that reached into the highest levels of the entertainment industry and beyond. As Francisco listened in growing horror, the caller made veiled references to organized crime figures who controlled significant portions of the substance supply chain that fed prescription medications to celebrities across the country. Elvis had been caught in a web that involved not just his personal physician, but a vast network of suppliers, distributors, and corrupt medical professionals who profited from keeping stars dependent and working. The caller suggested that Elvis had learned things about powerful people during his years at the top, secrets that were safer buried with him than revealed to the world. During that first terrifying conversation, the caller mentioned specific names that made Francisco realize just how deep this conspiracy ran. There were music industry executives whose careers depended on keeping their biggest stars performing regardless of their health, politicians who had connections to pharmaceutical companies and wanted no investigations that might expose uncomfortable relationships, and one pharmaceutical company executive whose name Francisco recognized from national news. These were not small-time criminals or local troublemakers, but people with the resources and motivation to ensure their secrets stayed hidden forever. The instructions Francisco received were precise and non-negotiable. His official report would emphasize Elvis's existing heart disease, which was real and well documented, while downplaying the extensive substance toxicology findings that told the real story of what had taken the king's life. Francisco was told exactly which details to include, which test results to minimize, and how to phrase his conclusions to guide the narrative away from the pharmaceutical nightmare he had actually discovered. The caller made it clear that deviation from these instructions would have immediate and severe consequences for everyone Francisco loved. 3 days after Elvis's funeral, a second call came that proved the threats were not empty words. The voice described in perfect detail what Francisco's 7-year-old daughter had worn to school that morning, down to the color of her hair ribbons and the cartoon character on her lunchbox. The message was unmistakable. They were watching, they were close, and they could reach his children at any moment. Francisco felt physically sick as he realized that invisible eyes had been following his little girl, observing her as she walked into her classroom, vulnerable and unaware of the danger surrounding her family. The reminder calls continued periodically over the next 5 years, always when Francisco seemed to be settling into a false sense of security. Sometimes months would pass without contact, then suddenly the phone would ring with that same calm voice, just checking in to make sure Francisco remembered his obligations. Each call mentioned some new detail about his family's activities, proof that the surveillance had never stopped, that someone was always watching and waiting for any sign that Francisco might break his silence. Francisco eventually learned that he was not the only person being controlled and threatened. Other witnesses who had been present at Baptist Memorial Hospital that day received similar visits and warnings. Staff members who had seen Elvis's condition, nurses who had observed the evidence, and medical technicians who had processed the test results were all systematically silenced through fear and intimidation. One nurse who made the mistake of speaking to a local reporter about some of the medications she had seen disappeared from Memphis within 2 weeks, relocating to another state and refusing to ever discuss that day again. Elvis had not been the victim of one bad doctor, but rather a small piece of a massive prescription substance empire that supplied celebrities across America, an operation that generated millions in illegal profits while destroying lives in the process. The cover-up conspiracy. The rewriting of history began before Elvis's body had even grown cold on the examination table. Within 24 hours of the king's death, a carefully orchestrated narrative was already taking shape, crafted by people who understood that the truth would destroy careers, collapse fortunes, and expose a corrupt system that reached into the highest levels of American entertainment and medicine. Dr. Francisco watched in stunned disbelief as powerful forces mobilized with military precision to ensure that the real story of what took Elvis Presley's life would never see the light of day. Emergency meetings were convened throughout that first night and the following day, bringing together an unlikely coalition of Memphis city officials, executives from RCA Records, representatives from the Presley estate, and Colonel Tom Parker himself. These meetings happened in closed rooms at Baptist Memorial Hospital and in private offices across Memphis, with participants speaking in hushed tones about damage control and narrative management. The decision was made quickly and unanimously to emphasize Elvis's existing heart condition and his family history of heart disease, framing his death as a tragic but natural consequence of genetics rather than the result of years of pharmaceutical misuse and medical negligence. What shocked Francisco most was discovering that media statements had been prepared and distributed before he had even completed his initial examination of Elvis's body. Someone had already decided what the official story would be, crafting carefully worded press releases that mentioned cardiac arrhythmia and downplayed any suggestion of substance involvement. The speed and coordination suggested that this response had been planned in advance, as though certain people had been expecting Elvis to pass away and had their crisis management strategy ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The pressure on Francisco intensified when the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners made it clear they wanted the case closed quickly and quietly. Board members who should have been demanding thorough investigation instead pushed for rapid conclusions and minimal public disclosure. Francisco received calls from board officials suggesting that prolonged examination would only feed media speculation and hurt Elvis's family during their time of grief. The message was clear even when left unspoken directly. Wrap this up fast, stick to the approved narrative, and do not dig any deeper than absolutely necessary. Files and medical records began mysteriously disappearing from Baptist Memorial Hospital within days of Elvis's death. Nursing notes that detailed the medications found at the scene vanished from their proper storage locations. Pharmacy records showing prescription histories were suddenly incomplete, and documentation of previous emergency treatments for Elvis went missing from the archives. The systematic removal of evidence suggested someone with inside access was sanitizing the official record, eliminating anything that contradicted the heart disease narrative being sold to the public. The toxicology report, which should have been completed and released within days, was deliberately delayed for weeks while experts worked to edit and minimize the findings. When the report finally emerged, it acknowledged some substance presence, but characterized the levels as therapeutic rather than toxic, despite Francisco's knowledge that the combination was absolutely lethal. Critical details about the number and variety of substances were buried in technical language that most people would not understand, allowing the media to continue focusing on the heart condition angle, while the pharmaceutical truth remained hidden in plain sight. Key witnesses who had been present during the crisis at Graceland or at the hospital were systematically silenced through a combination of financial incentives and legal pressure. Non-disclosure agreements were signed by multiple people who had seen or heard things that contradicted the official story. One emergency medical technician who had responded to the original call from Graceland found himself transferred to a position in another state within 2 weeks of Elvis's death, effectively removing him from Memphis before he could speak to persistent reporters who were asking uncomfortable questions about what paramedics had actually found that day. The Graceland staff members who had discovered Elvis's body were given scripts detailing exactly what they should say to investigators and media. Their statements became remarkably consistent and notably vague, describing finding Elvis unresponsive, but providing no specific details about medications, pill bottles, or anything else that might suggest substance involvement. Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend who had been at Graceland that fateful afternoon, faced intense pressure to remain silent about the numerous pill bottles she had seen in Elvis's bathroom and bedroom. The young woman, already traumatized by finding her boyfriend dead, was warned that speaking about such details would only hurt Elvis's legacy and subject her to public blame and scrutiny. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was brought into a private meeting where Francisco and others explained the full truth about what had taken his son's life. The elderly man wept as he learned about the extent of the substance dependency that had consumed Elvis's final years. But ultimately, he agreed to support the official heart disease story. Vernon believed, perhaps correctly, that protecting his son's image was the final act of love he could perform, even if it meant lying about how Elvis had really passed away. The cover-up was further motivated by significant financial considerations that few people understood at the time. Insurance policies worth millions of dollars would be jeopardized if Elvis's death were officially attributed to substance overdose rather than natural causes. Estate planning and future earnings from Elvis's music catalog could be affected by how his death was classified. Too many people had too much money at stake to allow the truth to emerge and complicate these financial arrangements. Baptist Memorial Hospital records related to Elvis's treatment were sealed for 25 years, an unusually long restriction that prevented researchers, journalists, and even family members from accessing the complete medical documentation. Francisco himself received a promotion and substantial financial incentives that coincided suspiciously with his cooperation in crafting the official narrative. Everyone who participated in the cover-up benefited in some way, receiving either money, career advancement, or protection from liability. Everyone benefited except Elvis himself, who even in death was being exploited by the system that had taken his life. But Dr. Francisco had done something that none of the conspirators knew about, something that would eventually expose their lies decades later. He had kept copies of everything, hidden away where no one would think to look, waiting for the day when truth would finally matter more than fear. The hidden evidence. Dr. Francisco made a decision in those chaotic first days after Elvis's death that would haunt and sustain him for the next 47 years. Even as he signed the falsified official report and watched the cover-up unfold around him, he secretly maintained duplicate files of his actual findings, copying documents and photographs that showed the real story of what had taken the king's life. Francisco understood instinctively that someday the truth would matter more than his fear, that history deserved an honest accounting, even if the present moment demanded lies and silence. The hidden files included photographs of Elvis's body that Francisco had been instructed to exclude from the official record, images that showed clear evidence of long-term intravenous substance use, and recent injection sites that contradicted the clean narrative being presented to the public. These photographs captured the physical reality of addiction in ways that words could never fully convey, showing a body that had been systematically damaged by years of pharmaceutical misuse. Francisco kept these images locked away in a safety deposit box that even his wife did not know existed, understanding that their discovery could cost him everything. The original unedited toxicology report remained in Francisco's possession, showing the full shocking extent of substances present in Elvis's system at the time of death. This document revealed 14 different substances, including massive quantities of codeine and morphine, levels that were undeniably toxic rather than therapeutic. The edited version that was eventually released to the public had minimized these findings to the point of dishonesty. But Francisco's copy proved exactly what had been hidden and why so many powerful people had demanded silence. His handwritten notes from the autopsy contradicted his final official report in numerous significant ways, detailing observations about organ damage, physical evidence of chronic substance misuse, and timeline inconsistencies that suggested something even more disturbing than simple overdose. Francisco had documented everything he observed during that examination, creating a contemporaneous record that could not be dismissed as faulty memory or later fabrication. These notes included his professional opinions about what had really caused Elvis's death, opinions that were completely opposite to what he would eventually sign his name to in the official documents. Francisco had also carefully documented the phone threats he received, writing down dates, times, and as much detail as he could remember about each conversation. He kept notes about the names mentioned by his mysterious caller, creating a list of music industry executives, politicians, and pharmaceutical company representatives who appeared to be connected to the cover-up. While he could not prove direct involvement by these individuals, the pattern suggested a conspiracy that reached far beyond Memphis and involved people with significant power and resources. Among the most troubling evidence Francisco had preserved were medical findings suggesting that Elvis may have accidentally overdosed after taking his normal medications, not realizing that someone had tampered with or increased the dosages without his knowledge. The concentration and combination of substances in Elvis's system suggested he had ingested multiple substances in close succession, possibly believing he was taking his regular prescriptions when the actual pills were far more potent than usual. This raised disturbing questions about who had prepared Elvis's medications that final day, and whether his death had been truly accidental or something far more sinister. The timeline documentation revealed significant discrepancies that had been glossed over in the official investigation. Medical evidence suggested that Elvis had been dead or dying for several hours before Ginger Alden discovered him that afternoon, contradicting the emergency response timeline that had been presented to the public. The state of rigor mortis and other physical indicators told Francisco that Elvis had likely lost consciousness much earlier than anyone had admitted, possibly suggesting he was already unconscious or dying when Ginger found him collapsed in his bathroom. Francisco's files included evidence that Elvis had suffered at least 2 previous near-fatal overdoses in the weeks before his death, incidents that had been quietly handled by Dr. Nick and kept completely secret from the public, and even from most of Elvis's inner circle. These close calls should have triggered immediate intervention and treatment, but instead, Elvis had simply been revived and sent back to his regular routine of performances and appearances. The medical establishment's failure to act on these warning signs represented a level of negligence that bordered on criminal. Documentation showed that Dr. Nick had been specifically warned by other physicians about Elvis's rapidly declining condition in the months before his death. Multiple doctors had reached out privately to express concern about the prescription patterns and Elvis's obvious deterioration, but these warnings had been ignored or dismissed. Francisco had copies of some of these communications, proving that the medical community had known Elvis was in crisis but had failed to intervene effectively. After carrying these secrets for nearly 5 decades, Dr. Francisco finally decided the time had come to release his evidence to the world. But his confession would reveal more than just a medical cover-up. It would expose the entire system that continues to destroy lives today, making Elvis's tragedy not just history, but a warning about the dangers that still exist. Justice denied, truth revealed. At 93 years old, Dr. Jerry Francisco finally felt free to speak the truth he had buried for 47 years. The statute of limitations on any potential crimes had long since expired, and most importantly, the people who had threatened him and his family were now dead themselves. Dr. Nick had passed away in 2016, Colonel Parker had passed away back in 1997, and the pharmaceutical representatives and music industry executives who had orchestrated the cover-up had either retired into obscurity or followed Elvis to the grave. The fear that had controlled Francisco's life for nearly 5 decades had finally lost its power over him. His adult children, now in their 50s with families of their own, had encouraged their father to reveal the truth before his own time ran out. They had watched the burden of his secret eat away at him throughout their lives, affecting his relationships and casting a shadow over moments that should have been filled with joy. Francisco's son told him that carrying this lie to his grave would only perpetuate the injustice done to Elvis and to all the families who deserved to understand what really happened that August day in 1977. The trial of Dr. Nick in 1981 had been Francisco's first opportunity to speak truthfully, but fear and legal maneuvering had prevented the full story from emerging. Dr. Nick was acquitted of overprescribing charges, and he spent the remaining 35 years of his life maintaining that he had done nothing wrong, and that Elvis's death was an unpreventable tragedy. That acquittal had allowed the official narrative to stand unchallenged, letting everyone involved escape accountability, while Elvis's memory remained tainted by suggestions that his death was somehow his own fault. Francisco now called publicly for the case to be reopened and re-examined using modern forensic standards and investigative techniques that had not existed in 1977. He argued that Elvis's death should be reclassified and studied as part of the larger prescription substance epidemic that continues to devastate American families today. The parallels between Elvis's death and more recent celebrity overdoses involving Prince, Michael Jackson, and Tom Petty showed that the system that took Elvis's life never really changed, but simply found new victims to exploit and destroy. What Francisco wanted the world to understand was that Elvis's death represented a failure of every institution that should have protected him. The medical establishment ignored obvious warning signs and allowed dangerous prescribing to continue unchecked. The entertainment industry prioritized profit over human life and kept Elvis working when he desperately needed treatment. His management exploited his addiction to maintain their own income streams. The pharmaceutical companies looked the other way while their products were being misused on a massive scale. Elvis had been surrounded by people whose job was supposedly to care for him, yet every single one of them failed when it mattered most. Francisco's message to the Presley family carried the weight of decades of guilt and regret. He apologized for his silence and for allowing them to believe a lie about how their beloved Elvis had passed away. He expressed hope that by finally revealing the truth, other families facing similar struggles with prescription substance addiction might find the courage to seek help before tragedy struck their own homes. What do you think about Dr. Jerry Francisco's confession? Do you think this could change anything? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and click the next video shown on your screen.